If you could please take a seat. I'd like to welcome everybody to this committee meeting this morning, October 7th. I'm joined by my dear friend and colleague, Richard Alarcon. We do not have a quorum as of yet, but we anticipate shortly we shall. At this time, Ms. Barclay and Mr. City Attorney, I think what we're going to do is go immediately to item 2, and we will begin hearing a report. So with that said, you want to read item 2 and we'll take it from there?
Yes, sir. Item 2 is a report from the Los Angeles Housing Department relative to the 2009 economic study of the Rent Stabilization Ordinance and the local housing market.
Okay, if the individuals that are going to give the report could please come forward. We will do public comment after the report.
Good morning, council members. I am Ana Ortega, the Assistant Director of the Rent Stabilization Division in the Housing Department. Today's report is going to be on the economic study of the impact of the Rent Stabilization Ordinance on the local housing market. As you know, the Rent Stabilization Ordinance of the city was adopted 30 years ago, and during that time there have been a number of major studies of how the ordinance is operating and impacting the local housing market. The last of these studies was done in 1994. So in 2007, the council authorized a new study of the ordinance and its impact. And through a thorough RFP process, the firm of the Economic Roundtable was selected to conduct the study. We've been working with them very closely for some time now, and we received their report earlier this year, which was sent to the mayor and council, and that is now the topic before you. They have prepared a briefing on the findings and recommendations, and so they'll be presenting that now.
Okay, thank you. And you're with the Housing Department?
Yes, I am, sir.
It's a good one. You may want to keep her. Anyway, could we get started?
Thank you very much. My name is Daniel Flaming. I'm from the Economic Roundtable, and I'm here with 3 of my colleagues, Patrick Burns, Michael Matsunaga, and Ken Barr. We'll shift back and forth among ourselves in making the presentation. We're going to be doing it from paper, if that's okay.
That's fine.
And there is a copy of this PowerPoint in front of each of you, and I believe there's also some copies for the audience. Just briefly, we're going to cover overcrowding and rent burden, renters' knowledge of the RSO ordinance, property maintenance, financial profile of RSO properties, analysis of financial outcomes for owners, our recommendations, and then there's a large section of background slides that are there in case they're relevant to a question that comes up. So, Michael, would you mind leading off?
Sure. Good morning. I'm going to present a few slides that discuss 2 issues that directly impact renters, and that's overcrowding and rent burden. Sorry. On slide 4, we have a slide about overcrowding. And this is one area where we saw some pretty interesting findings and some that's really surprised us. Severe overcrowding, just to define it, occurs when there are more than 1.5 people per room in a unit, which is equivalent to having 5 people in a standard 1-bedroom apartment with a kitchen and a living room. In past census years, severe overcrowding impacted over 20% of renters. In 1990, 21% of renters were severely overcrowded. In 2000, about 24% of renters were severely overcrowded. When we looked at the 2007 data, we're seeing something very different. Only 9% of renters were severely overcrowded. This was interesting because when we looked at the number of rental units in the city, in 2007 there were less rental units per person in the city compared to 2000. But when we took an inventory of the bedrooms in the city, there were actually more bedrooms per person in the city. We did see the sharpest decline in overcrowding in studios and 1-bedroom apartments. And this isn't surprising because during this time frame between 2000 and 2007, we had the housing boom where a lot of the smaller units were replaced by larger, more expensive units. So we had more bedrooms in the city. Despite some of this positive news, we're still seeing that low-income renters and a majority of households with 5 or more people are still overcrowded. About a quarter of renters in poverty are overcrowded, and a majority of households with 5 or more people are still overcrowded in the city. Next slide, slide number 5, we're looking at rent burden. And again, to put a definition on severe rent burden, a renter is severely rent burdened if they're spending 50% or more of their household income for rent. And they're considered rent burden if they're spending 30 to 49% of their income for rent. We are seeing that since 2000, rent burden rates in the city have increased. And this is for 2 primary reasons. Since 1990, renter household incomes have been on a steady decline. And since 2000, rents in the city have steadily increased. In 2000, 24% of renters were severely rent burdened, spending 50% or more of their income for rent. In 2007, 29% of renters were severely rent burdened. An additional 29% were rent burdened, spending 30 to 49% of their income for rent. Some of the vulnerable populations were seniors, renters with disabilities, and low-income households. About 40% of seniors were severely rent burdened, 45% of renters with disabilities, and 75% of households in poverty were spending 50% or more of their income on rent. Slide number 6.
Let me stop you for 1 minute. We've just been joined by my colleague Ed Reyes. So, Mr. City Attorney, we now have a quorum. Please continue.
Slide number 6 looks at the question we asked renters and owners on our survey. We surveyed about 4,900 renters throughout the city and over 2,000 owners in the city. We asked a general question about the importance of affordable housing in the city, and 95% of renters believe that affordable housing is very or somewhat important in the city, and 60% of owners also believe that affordable housing is very important.
Yeah. Now, our survey, or our study actually surveyed a large number of renters living in the city of Los Angeles, and one of the things we wanted to know from them was the degree to which they're aware of the RSO status of their units and also aware of the protections that come with the ordinance. What we found, which is starting to show on one of the next slides there, is that awareness of just the fact that the RSO limits rent increases on an annual basis in their units. Only about 72% of RSO occupants in the city of LA were aware of that fact. That's that kind of incremental percentage increase per year set forth by the housing department. A lower percentage, 52%, were aware that the RSO limits the possible number of evictions that can take place for residents of an RSO unit. Likewise, we looked at this information stratified across different household incomes, and that's shown on the next slide. That knowledge gap about whether or not people were aware of the fact that the RSO sets the annual amount of rent increases, that varies significantly by the level of household income. We found that about 41% of households with less than $10,000 income per year were aware of this aspect of the RSO, that it capped the amount of annual increase. But when you go up the income range for households amongst our survey respondents, we found that higher income households are very much more aware of the protections of the RSO.
I'm going to pick up on slide number 10. So given that a significant share of renters don't know whether they live in an RSO unit or not, or they don't know their rights under their RSO, we wanted to check if any renters were receiving illegal rent increases. We used our survey data for this, and it was very unique in that we're able to capture data that's unavailable in the census. So we had the RSO status of their unit, their starting rents, their current rents, and also their length of tenancy in the building. So we're able to apply the annual allowable rent increase to their starting rents and to check whether their current rents are where they should be under the RSO. What we found was that 44% of renters had rents that were right on par with where they would be if their rents were increased by the annual allowable rent increase. 30% of renters had rents that were below what they could be under the RSO, meaning that in some years rent increases were foregone. But most importantly, we found that over a quarter of renters had rents that were above where they could be under the RSO, meaning that they could be possibly unauthorized rent increases. This raises a lot of concerns because the RSO's one of the primary goals is to make sure that renters are protected and that rents aren't arbitrarily increased. We took a further look at the 27% that were receiving unauthorized rent increases, and we did find that low-income renters were more likely to have these unauthorized rent increases. And it really ties back to what Patrick just presented, that low-income renters are less aware of their rights, and they're also the population that most needed these protections.
Moving on to issues of property maintenance, there's a public interest in preserving the RSO inventory because rents are cheaper in it and rents are stabilized. So one of the issues is the condition of RSO rental units. Renters in RSO units were more likely to say that their housing was in poor condition than renters in non-RSO units. 31% of RSO renters said that their units were in fair or poor condition versus just 19% of renters in non-RSO units. And this, on the flip side of it, 81% of renters in non-RSO units said their units were in quite good condition, compared to just 69% for RSO renters. The city's primary tool for supporting basic improvements in RSO units is the Capital Improvement Pass-Through Program. On slide 13, we look at the flow of loans or of approvals through that program. In the early years of the program, 100% of capital improvements could be passed through. That was reduced to 60%, and the flow of funds and approvals through that program dropped off drastically. So it raises the issue of whether there's enough reinvestment in rent-stabilized units. Moving on to look at the financial profile of RSO properties.
Let me stop you for a minute. We've just been joined by Council Member Tony Cardenas, and with that, you may continue.
Thank you. In understanding the financial picture for RSO units and their owners, we first wanted to kind of get an understanding as to how many of them purchased these properties before versus after the RSO went into effect, the degree that certain owners, when they buy after 1978, are aware that the RSO is already in place. What we found was that 79% of current RSO units were purchased after 1978 and after the ordinance was in effect. This varies depending on where you are in the city, and the little pie charts in the map kind of lay out the degree to which that's the case. From, say, a high of 91% of owners in Panorama City saying that had purchased their units after the RSO went into effect, to just 63% in West LA that have purchased after the RSO went into effect.
So most RSO owners entered this set of rules after they were in effect. And that leads to the question of how profitable these owners are. On slide 16, we show the results of asking them whether they made a profit last year. Citywide, 28% said they made a profit, 25% said they broke even. This varies a lot by size of ownership, with the bigger owners reporting much higher levels of profit, the smaller owners having more difficulty breaking even or turning a profit. On slide 17, we look at the frequency of rent increases, and we see that citywide about 30...
Excuse me, Mr. Chair.
Yes,
Just relative to slide 16, how does that fare on the non-RSO?
We had another question that asked whether this was similar to their outcomes for non-RSO properties if they owned other properties, and only 23% said their RSO properties were less profitable than their non-RSO. So it appears that these outcomes are similar to outcomes for non-RSO properties.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
you good? Continue.
Moving on to slide 17, the larger owners of RSO properties are much more likely to increase rents every year. There's At this point, there's effectively a use it or lose it clause in the RSO that there's an annual authorized increase amount, and if that increase isn't made, it's lost. And because of that, the larger owners who operate in a more business-like fashion in general typically increase rents every year, whereas smaller owners don't.
Why is that?
I think it's more personalized with the small owners. A lot of times they're a neighbor living next door. They know more about the personal circumstances of their renters. They're less impersonal about it.
They're less greedy.
Yeah,
Yes.
I think there's also another factor. If you have a vacancy in a small building, it's a big percentage of your rent, so you don't want to take as much risk.
Yeah, thanks. We compared the frequency of increases for RSO versus non-RSO renters from the renter survey data. And what we see is that the RSO renters have their rents increased more frequently than the non-RSO renters. So our assessment is that the use it or lose it provisions are causing more frequent rent increases for the RSO renters than for the non-RSO renters. Another question that's relevant to owners' financial condition is the level of debt that they have on their property. Citywide, over 60% of owners of RSO properties have taken on, have debt on their RSO units. Over 3/4 of that debt was taken out during the housing bubble from 2003 or later. Because the bigger owners are more likely to have taken on debt than the smaller owners, this debt was taken on when money was pretty easy to get, and we're in a different economic climate now with cash flow that's lower, and that debt is harder to service. Owners of 77% of RSO units have this recent debt, and many of them are likely to be facing problems servicing that debt in this economic environment. Now to go on to slide 19.
Okay, if I can get you to hold for 1 minute before we move to slide 19. If anyone that's here would like to speak, you have about 2 minutes to turn in a public comment card. After 2 minutes, I'm not going to take any more, so I just want to alert. No, this is on item 2, So you have 2 more minutes. With that, we're slide 20, correct?
Yes, thank you. Slide 19.
19.
Slide 19 shows the annual change in the Consumer Price Index from 1979 through 2008, and this is what guides the annual increase in RSO rents. The average of that increase over this 30-year period is 4.3%. And one of the things to consider is where that average falls within the 3% floor and the 8% ceiling on RSO rent increases. And what this shows is that the floor is high, that the 4.3 average is not evenly straddled by the ceiling and the floor, that the floor is up high relative to where the ceiling is. To straddle it equally, the floor would be either 0 or 1%. And now I'd like to turn it over to my colleague Ken Barr to talk about his analysis of financial outcomes from this.
I was worried about you, Mr. Barr. I thought they had muscled you out. You only got to say one sentence. So I'm glad that this is your section.
Okay, thanks. I just wanted to indicate, I'm an attorney and an urban planner, and I've been a consultant to numerous cities for...
Not you.
Okay. I've been a consultant to numerous cities on rent stabilization issues for many years, and I've written many law review articles that have been extensively cited by appellate courts and the state Supreme Court. Basically, to provide perspective on this ordinance, we're in a market, like most of the United States, where there's very high turnover in tenants. 21% have moved into their unit in the past year, half have moved into their units within the past 5 years. So basically, apartment owners get to reset their rents for a substantial amount of their units at market levels. And in many ways, the rent stabilization ordinance has a limited impact, and it replicates the market, where owners wait until they have a vacancy in order to impose a rent increase that exceeds the CPI. But basically, the impact of the ordinance is to provide tenants with insurance against exceptional rent increases while they're sitting tenants. And when I say exceptional rent increases, I mean rent increases exceeding the CPI. Overall, the annual increases that you've allowed from 2000 to 2008, which is about 27% cumulatively, is about the same as what rents increased in the national market during this period. However, it's substantially below the rent increases in the overall Los Angeles market, which were far above the national market increases during this period. They were about 49%. So basically, the ordinance brought down the rent increases to the national average for sitting tenants. The increases were, and it's complicated to explain, and I detail it in the report, were more than adequate to cover operating cost increases. And of course, you have a big city, so there's some cases that would have been exceptions, where units had very low rents and not many tenants moved in the building, or none did.
How do you justify that it was enough to cover? I mean,
okay.
What formula do you
Well, basically, I compared the average rent increase, which was about, depending on whether you use the median or mean, was about $300 a month during this period. And looking at the operating cost increases, it seemed we only had rough data. They were about $120 to $200 a month during this period. And basically, most of the operating expenses are maintenance, or a substantial percentage are maintenance and management, and we didn't have data on those expenses. There's no, except for very large buildings, but basically for those type of expenses, typically the cost increases would track the market or the CPI. Property tax increases are exceptional when a building is sold. Utility increases and city fees, of course, those can increase a lot, but they're a small part of the rent. And what happened was, during this period, from 2003 to 2007, there was an exceptional increase in apartment values. They tripled, and if you go to page 24 of the handouts, there's a chart.
Slide 24.
Slide 24, I'm sorry. That shows this, and with 2008 data is not included here, but in 2008 there was a much smaller volume of sales, and it seemed the price didn't go down, but maybe it was hard to sell buildings, and because it was hard to get financing. But the question is, why would apartment values triple if the rents went up, average rents in the LA went up 50% about? Well, the reason was because interest rates dropped from about 9.5% for apartments to about 6% or 5.5%. So basically, the cost of getting money to buy buildings went up, drastically declined. So as a result, apartment values went way, way up, far more than rents. And this was consistent with national trends. It wasn't unique to Los Angeles. And
so, let me...
Go ahead,
You're
Mr.
saying
Allison.
access to capital increased the number of people that might be interested in purchasing?
Well,
So it drove the price up?
yeah, I wouldn't say the number of people, but it decreased the cost of money. So now you could borrow for the same interest payments, you could get $180,000 in capital instead of $100,000 in capital, and that drives up the prices of what people are willing to pay for apartment buildings.
There were more parties interested in purchasing
Yeah, or you're right, or the ones who are purchasing will pay more, yes. You're buying a machine
More
that...
demand.
What?
There was more demand.
Yes. You're buying a machine that produces income, and you'll pay more for that machine. And plus also returns in other parts of the economy went down, and were also a lot riskier. So you'll pay, and I have another chart in the report, which I didn't submit today, that shows basically how much more people would pay for the same $5,000 in income. But basically, you couldn't put your money in the bank and get the same return, so you'd pay more, put more money somewhere else to get that return.
Thank you.
And on the other hand, you heard today already a lot of substantial percentage of apartment owners indicated that they weren't making money. Well, the reason was that they're increasing rents. They were recent purchasers within the last 5 years or whatever. Their increasing rents were offset by increasing mortgage debt. So basically, in some sense, you had a zero-sum game in the sense that the rents went up a lot, but the profits didn't go up for the recent purchasers because of the increasing mortgage debt. Okay, then the only thing I'd say very quickly, is that
They gave you the yellow slip?
yes,
Hey, what does that say? Hurry the heck up, huh?
right. I have 0 minutes left.
Oh, God.
I would just say this quickly. Your annual increase formula based on the CPI is the most reasonable. There's no perfect formula. Your gas and electricity allowance of 1% a year for each of these services, which is $10 a year, does not make sense because $10 a year increase for these services is very huge compared to the overall cost of these utilities, which might be $30 or $40 a month. So allowing the increase of $10 a month doesn't make sense. And so I'll stop here.
Mr. Reyes has
Yes,
a question or two of you.
Well, first, thank you for that insight, and based on your comments, I'm assuming there's a context here that has a national stage, if you will, as you go through your analysis. One variable that seems to elude us, and it's a fact that I think has a great amount of value, especially in certain parts of our districts. The voters took upon themselves to take on bond measures, to build new police stations, to build new libraries in the millions and millions of dollars. We took on efforts in the millions to build new schools. We've rebuilt streets. In my district in particular, I've been very fortunate to see a major improvement upgrade in the infrastructure. Close to 70 acres of new park space, new rail stations, in one area, 3 new high schools within 8 blocks, a new library. Now, this is an area that was deemed undesirable by the market, by the mainstream, and it was treated as such. Mainly the absentee landlords neglected their properties. We had tenement housing, we had old brick buildings, turn of the century, 1890s, 1910 stock, that was remaining, where you crammed in 2-3 families in one-bedroom apartments. Fast forward this phenomena you're speaking of in which the increases debt, but how are we missing the value of our public dollars, our tax dollars, into these areas that have stimulated, it's become a magnet. You have gentrification occurring, you got people of other income groups, people of other ethnicities coming in that probably would have never entered into these areas but are now present and still buying, displacing families at a wholesale level.
Makes sense. I'm glad you mentioned.
When have you had the opportunity to address that phenomenon or look at that incremental value increase that the taxpayer has borne upon themselves to improve their infrastructure, yet the same folks we were trying to serve are the very same people that are being displaced? And how do you factor that into the analysis, or is anyone even studying that element as it impacts these values and impacts how some of these property owners could qualify for higher loans, higher mortgages because of the increased value? Has that been valued or in any way factored into your analysis in any study in the country?
Boy, okay. Well, I guess a few things. If the owners are investing more in the property, they can generally, under most ordinances, and if their cost increases are exceptional, they can go through the fair profit, fair return.
No, I'm not talking about the owner, I'm talking about the increments of value that's increased because of the public dollars impact in that area. You can't ignore the millions of dollars of new high schools, new libraries, new parks.
Right.
That was supposed to be addressing the needs of the people that live there. Now they're the same people that are being displaced. Has anyone factored in what is the community benefit, what is the obligation of these owners, if you want to put it that way, to understand their gain? They are gaining from our tax dollars because we have improved these areas.
Okay, I guess my reaction is I don't know how you can make somebody understand a particular thing. I mean, I think the only thing you can do is provide the tenants with security, which you're doing. Of course, I think you need better enforcement of the ordinance, for example, registration, to make sure that these tenants don't have exceptional rent increases and that the law is being followed. I don't know if that answers your question.
No, I don't think it does.
I don't know if they were tasked to...
No, I understand that. On this report, Mr. Chair, with all due respect, I understand that, but I think it's a very valuable factor that we are overlooking. And I was asking, because you did address national trends in other cities, so I was just asking if there's any other cities that have taken that variable into account. And it sounds like there hasn't been.
Well, I think it sounds like an education thing of explaining that, the rents are going up because of the community effort. If that's...
Well, you have this incremental improvement that is visually seen, that has a very real value because now it's becoming more desirable.
Right.
It's not as undesirable, and these property owners are benefiting from it. And some have the audacity to push people out and say, because it is nicer, I know I can get higher paying tenants and get rid of the folks that we don't want here because they're paying less.
Ken, if I could comment. As I hear the question, Councilmember Reyes, you're raising the issue of equity, that the public in general, through its tax dollars, is improving communities, and in some instances, a limited number of people are taking the benefit out through new development. And I think the rent stabilization ordinance can only deal with part of that issue.
Okay.
The city is doing a follow-on study of the fees that are appropriate for development in order to provide good and decent housing for everybody. And I think that study and that set of tools may help answer this issue you're raising.
So it would be one way to begin to put substance to this notion of nexus.
Yes.
So they can stand up in court, and the courts can say, you can't take away the individual property right of this property owner if we are able to factor in this nexus, this incremental value that has been ignored.
Right. And essentially to look at if people are doing developments in a community, what are their obligations to that community and to the public to make sure it's sustainable for everybody, is the broader question that next study will get at.
Okay, so I don't want to deviate from what the purpose of this study, but I just think it's a harsh reality of many of our districts. We spend much of our career improving our neighborhoods, and then we turn around and the very same people we're trying to serve are the people that are being penalized the most, and that to me is a balancing act that we have to address.
I wonder, Mr. Reyes, and it's something you and I can probably chat about, if we couldn't word something in a way where we could get a study that deals with that.
I think that's something that is of time.
Yeah.
I think a different way that I would state the case, and you can look at the issue of crime. The fact that we've had radical reduction in crime over the last 5 years, I think has contributed to a market in these particular affected areas. So essentially what we're doing is we're driving the demand up for people that own apartments in these areas because we've improved the quality of schools, lowered crime, and people want to live in those areas more. And actually that has probably had a stabilizing effect on the people that live there. They don't move as often because we're not booting gang members out of apartments because they're no longer there. So I think it's really the question of how governmental improvements have, or infrastructural improvements or social improvements like reducing crime have actually benefited apartments that are designated as RSOs. I think we can make a strong case for that. And you're right, we never study that.
Yeah, we should come up with a way.
Yeah.
I think this committee would have a responsibility to attempt to do something.
And I think the timing issues, given what's occurring at the state level in the courts, there's cases right now where they're using Costa-Hawkins as a way to say you can't do this and that, and ignoring that. I think that very important investment that the taxpayer has demonstrated through all the different improvements. So we'll work on that.
Yeah.
We'll hopefully get the CLA to work with us on
I
shaping
really
that.
think we should. Now, to return to your presentation.
I wanted to cover slides 27 and 28, which are our most critical recommendations. The first recommendation is to retain the current scope of coverage of the rent stabilization ordinance, but to do what's possible to streamline it for owners of 1 to 4 units. That mostly involves technical assistance and possibly a break on the capital improvement pass-through program. Secondly, to establish a rent registry. This would enable the city to send letters to every renter in the city. That address file doesn't exist now. It would also enable the city to track rent increases and to identify possible unauthorized rent increases rather than simply having a complaint-driven program. We also recommend that the annual RSO registration fee, which is split between owners and renters, be increased by the amount necessary to pay for implementing recommendations. The big ticket item is the rent registry, which would cost about $1.49 a unit to get in place and about $3.49 a unit annually to maintain. So if you spread it over all the units, it's not, in our view, a particularly high cost for all of the benefit it would provide. In terms of annual rent increases, we recommend that the utility allowance for the master metered buildings only be increased when there's actual increases in cost. Right now it's a 1% annual increase, which exceeds the increase in actual costs. We recommend that the city continue to use the Consumer Price Index, and 100% of that index is the benchmark for annual increases. We recommend eliminating the 3% floor on rent increases. This has to do with that issue of evenly straddling the average annual change in the Consumer Price Index. This is particularly significant when it's likely that at the end of this current year we'll have a negative change in the CPIs, that it'll be about one-fifth of a percent decrease, so it would seem inappropriate to have a 3% RSO increase pass through. We recommend allowing rent banking. This would eliminate the use it or lose it element of the rent increases. We recommend increasing the capital improvement pass-through to 75% for all capital improvements and 100% for the structural integrity of the building. We also recommend publicizing the just and reasonable rent increase application program if owners have extreme inequities in the level of rents for their units. So with that, we would like to thank you for your time and your interest. We're available for any questions and whatever we can do to be helpful.
Okay, well, I want to thank you for the presentation. I do have a quick question what we attempt to do here is to strike a balance. I mean, we understand that the individuals who own the buildings are important, but the individuals that live in and rent these buildings are equally important as well. So the key is to try to come up with a way so that everybody survives. And so given the report, which makes a lot of sense to me, the only area where I have concerns is where it relates to the small owners and their level of knowledge. And when you look at the percentage of who says they've made a profit or who has broken even, you see that they don't appear to be in that, group as much. And so I would want to try to do what we can to create some balance for them as well.
Yes.
So are there any recommendations where it relates to the 4 units and below?
The 2 recommendations, or the 3 recommendations that affect those units are, 1, to provide widely available technical assistance workshops for those owners. I think a lot of times they just have problems in general dealing with managing rental units. And then you add an overlay of responsibility of the administration of the RSO program that makes it more complex. So to provide technical assistance for these owners, we're also recommending that they get 100% pass-through on any capital improvements, rather than just the 75% for the non-structural things. It would be 100% for them. We're also recommending more frequent communications and more extensive communications with owners of RSO properties about the provisions of the program.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions?
On the 100% pass-through,
Mr. Alarcon.
with small units, wouldn't that have a more dramatic impact on the rent increases?
It would affect rent increases. Right now, the rent change out of the capital improvement pass-through is fairly small. It's the typical increase is about $19 a month, and 75% of all of the pass-throughs are for less than $24 a month. So, and we're recommending that the term of repayment be extended so that those levels be kept where they are as much as possible through that program.
Thank you.
Okay, at this point, I'll ask you to go back to your seats. And again, thank you on behalf of the entire committee. Now, we have another item that we must deal with. So I'm going to begin to call up the individuals who filled out cards for public comment. I want to remind or indicate to everyone that's here that we are not going to take any official action today. Primarily, we will send this back, and then we will ask the department to return, and we'll have more question and answer. So I just want people to know that there will not be any action taken today. In the interest of time, individuals will be given 1 minute for their public comments. So with that said, I want to call Al Sabo, James Porter, Debbie Burton, please come forward. And I have another seat, Steve Diaz. And Robert, I think it's Cherno. Don't be shy. Okay, Mr. Sabo. Then you're first, sir.
Good morning. 7 years ago, catastrophic illness forced me out of my residence, basically wiped out all of my savings and health insurance, and I was forced to move into lower-cost RSO property. It's the only way that I could afford to live without being on the street, and the RSO works pretty good. However, there does need to be some systemic changes to it, simply because when you continuously raise my rent at 6%, originally when I moved in I was paying 25% of my income. Currently I'm now 40% of my income goes to rent. At this rate, it's unsustainable for me to continue living in this place. If this continues and we don't put some type of cap on the total amount of the increase, eventually I'll be forced to the street, and so will a lot of other people living in your areas. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Mr. Porter.
My name is James Porter, and I'm a member of Los Angeles Community Action Network, LA CAN. I have been in the city of Los Angeles I have been a renter in the city of Los Angeles for over 15 years. The Los Angeles Rent Stabilization Ordinance is a tool that helps preserve communities and prevent displacement. City councils use this opportunity to create balance between low-income tenants and landlords. Landlords are doing well off, and we are not. We need to stop paying more. We are recommending that rent increase for tenants be lower. For example, the utility pass-through be eliminated. Lower-income people need rent relief.
Thank you. Ms. Burton?
Good morning. My name is Deborah. I'm a member of LA CAN, and I've been a renter in the city of Los Angeles for over 40 years. My experience shows that rent stabilization ordinance is one of the most important tools we have in LA to prevent homelessness and displacement, as well as to improve and preserve our communities. We need you to reduce rent for low-income tenants as you review LASO. For example, eliminate the rent pass-through and eliminate the minimum rent increase. These are unfair rent increases for tenants. Additionally, we urge you to take the opportunity to help change state laws so that more units can be covered by LASO. There are tens of thousands of units in South and East LA that needs protection. Additionally, to lower our rent now, we need you to work to eliminate barriers to expanding LASO. If we do both, we can protect homes and communities throughout LA, and we will help prevent homelessness.
Thank you. Mr. Chernow?
Yeah, my name is Robert Chernow. I'm both an investor and I also represent clients in the City of Los Angeles rent control units. I listened closely to the recommendations that were made, and there was no mention of the fact that there's an unfairness in the recovery of the tenant's share of the rent stabilization fees. Under the code, we're only allowed to recover it during the month of June with a 30-day notice and also a copy of the certificate of registration. Unfortunately, the department doesn't send out these registration forms on time a lot of the time, and we're not able to recover these fees. And in the larger buildings, this is a substantial amount. Gary Squire, the former head of the department years ago, assured us that he agreed and that he was going to make recommendations and change this. We've waited a number of years now, and I find it very disappointing again that it wasn't even mentioned today by the recommendations. We clearly need to pay our share, but we feel it's only fair that the tenants pay theirs and that the system be made fair so that we have the opportunity to recover these fees.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Gary Squire, you go back a bit.
I do indeed.
Mr. D. Oh.
On that point, unless this gentleman is misunderstood the presentation, I think it's appropriate that we instruct the staff to make sure that they address that if they haven't addressed it already when they report back to this committee on the subsequent report. Mr. Chairman?
I think that's an excellent idea. Mr. Diaz?
First of all, I would like to say that it's a shame that in a city that is primarily made up of Spanish-speaking Angelinos that we did not have translation equipment for folks that took out their day. My name is Steve Diaz, and I'm a member of LA CAN. I also have been a renter for most of my life. Today, I'm here to say that the City Council should take the following steps to improve the LARSO. First of all, it needs to end any additional utilities pass-through that landlords are allowed to add on to our rent increase every year. The RSO study showed it itself that there is no connection between what they charge us, what they're allowed to pass through to us, and what they actually pay. Additionally, our rent should be lowered. As the study shows, landlords are doing well. They're doing extremely well. And we're doing extremely bad. And as this city continues to charge us more rent, we won't be able to call this city home. And it's a shame that we sit here in a great city and say we could not, there's going to come a time if our rent is not lowered that we cannot call this our home. lower our rents, lower the community's rents. Thank you.
Thank you. And, Mr. Diaz, this committee has always been sensitive. I don't know what happened today, why we didn't have the translation equipment, but you can be assured that we will have it the next time.
Thank you.
Okay, Mr. Larry Gross, Hilda Garcia, Maria Rodriguez, Maria Sandoval, and Barbara Schultz.
Good morning, Larry Gross, Coalition for Economic...
Wait, Larry, till we get people...
See,
No, yeah, I appreciate it. I just want everybody situated. And let's keep the chatter down and let Mr. Gross speak. Yes.
Larry Gross, Coalition for Economic Survival. We've provided you with recommendations from Call to Action, tenant advocates. We commend the Housing Department and the Economic Roundtable for their hard work in providing us with very important data. But unfortunately, it reveals that LA tenants' rent burden has significantly increased, with more tenants paying a greater percentage of their income to rent, and that over a quarter of renters, 27%, have received illegal rent increases. At the same time, the study shows that landlords' net operating income has significantly increased, exceeding national levels, and property values of RSO buildings have skyrocketed. It appears the RSO has done an excellent job in ensuring landlords a more than fair profit, but has somewhat failed in its goal to provide tenants with reasonable and affordable rents. We strongly urge you consider our recommendations and deal with the rent burden issue, because without dealing with the rent burden issue, the time and taxpayer expense spent on this excellent report would have been wasted. Thank you.
Thank you, Larry. Ms. Hilda Garcia.
Yo soy la señora Hilda García y soy residente de Boyle Heights, pertenezco a la Unión de Vecinos Unidos. Muy buenos días tengan todos ustedes, señores comisionados y público en general. Antes que nada, quiero darles las gracias.
Oh, I was going to get Mr. Cardenas, but...
She can read it in Spanish and then I'll translate it.
Okay, fine.
Mi nombre es Hilda García. Soy residente de Boyle Heights y pertenezco a la Unión de Vecinos.
My name is Hilda Garcia. I'm a resident of Boyle Heights and I'm a member of Unión de Vecinos.
Buenos días tengan todos ustedes, señores comisionados y público en general. Antes que nada, quiero darles las gracias por permitirme el uso de la palabra.
So good morning, members of the committee and the public in general. Before anything, I'd like to thank you for giving me this space to speak today.
Para expresarles el sentir de muchas personas que, al igual que yo y mi familia, estamos sufriendo en este tiempo de crisis económico, ya que...
And I would like to express to you the sentiment that my family and many of my neighbors are living through at this moment of crisis, of economic crisis.
Ya que nos ha afectado a todos en diferentes formas, porque hemos perdido trabajos y por ahora somos muchos los que estamos desempleados.
And this has affected many families in different ways, being that many of us have lost our employment, and many of us are suffering unemployment and also...
Y desesperados mes con mes, pensando cómo vamos a pagar la renta de nuestras viviendas, por lo que hoy venimos a exponer ante ustedes nuestras necesidades inmediatas que creo que van a considerarlas, congelar las rentas por el tiempo que dure la crisis. Dice, le pido yo en nombre de la Unión y les agradezco que anticipado, yo pienso que sí lo tomarán en cuenta, gracias, y que no haya aumento de rentas.
And so, due to this unemployment, many of us are worried month to month of how we're going to pay our rent. This is why I've come today in front of you to express to you the immediate necessities that we have, for you to freeze our rent increases and for the time being during this economic crisis. And we ask this in the name of all of our neighbors and Unión de Vecinos members, and we thank you for your time and for taking this into account.
Thank you. Maria Rodriguez.
Sí, mi nombre es María Rodríguez.
Can we borrow you
Yes.
a little longer?
Ok. Mi nombre es María Rodríguez, pertenezco a la Unión de Vecinos y vivo en Boyle Heights.
My name is Maria Rodriguez. I'm a member of Unión de Vecinos, and I live in Boyle Heights.
Nuestra recomendación es que expandan el control de rentas de 1978 a 1995.
I come with a recommendation that you consider expanding rent control from 1978 to 1995.
Porque en nuestra área se ha perdido muchísima vivienda para hacer proyectos, para hacer la nueva comandancia de policía y lo que es el metro.
Because in my neighborhood, we've lost so many housing units due to the new development projects such as the new police station.
Toda esta vivienda que se está construyendo nueva ya no está bajo control de renta.
And there's also new housing that's being created that is no longer under rent control.
Nuestras familias han crecido, la crisis está muy fuerte ahorita con nosotros.
Our family has grown and the crisis is really hitting us hard.
Nuestros hijos ya buscan vivienda igual que nosotros de bajo control y no la encuentran.
Our children are also seeking affordable housing in these days and they can't find anything.
Nosotros les pedimos que tomen en cuenta nuestra recomendación, ya que con la crisis no solamente quienes trabajan en restaurantes, en cualquier área baja, sino que hasta personas ahorita que tienen muchos estudios han perdido trabajos.
And we ask that you take into account our recommendation being that it's not only restaurant workers and low-income wage earners that are seeking this support from you. It's also people who are very well-educated that are losing their jobs.
Les agradezco por escucharnos y le agradezco a las organizaciones que nos están apoyando con su unión. Gracias.
I thank you for supporting us, and I also would like to give thanks to all of the organizations that are supporting us in these difficult times as well. Thank you.
Thank you. And now for our second Maria, Ms. Sandoval.
Muy buenos días. Mi nombre es María Sandoval. Vivo aquí en Boyle Heights desde el 94.
Good morning. My name is Maria Sandoval, and I live in Boyle Heights since 1994.
Estoy aquí para apoyar y pertenezco a Unión de Vecinos también. Y vengo aquí a apoyar a la extensión de control de renta.
I'm here today as a member of Unión de Vecinos, and I'm here to ask for your support in considering a rent control expansion to 1995.
Como mis compañeras han dicho, la estación de policía, el proyecto de Pico Aliso, el metro, ha destruido muchos edificios y no...
As my neighbors and friends have expressed to you, the new creation of this police station in Boyle Heights, as well as the metro, has eliminated many housing units in our neighborhood.
No están construyendo más edificios para que haya apartamentos de bajos recursos.
And there is no construction of new buildings with affordable housing units in our neighborhood.
Y les pido que pues nos pongan atención a los pedidos que hemos estado aquí viniendo y les agradezco a cada uno de ustedes por su atención. Gracias.
And we ask that you take into consideration the petition of the people that are here in front of you today, and we thank you for your time.
Thank you. Okay, Barbara Schultz.
Yes, hi, my name is Barbara Schultz. I'm an attorney with Legal Aid Foundation of Los Angeles. I think the most immediate thing you can do as you hear these stories today is eliminate the rent in the 3% floor and the 2% pass-through. Right now, you heard from the consultant there's going to be a negative CPI, and yet with the rules right now, already overburdened tenants would be subject to a 3% rent increase, or for those in master immediate building, a 5% rent increase. That is not balanced. That is not just. I also just wanted to respond to the landlord advocate that talked about the fees. We're in agreement. They're not fair. And the reason they're not fair is the SCEP fee gets passed through to tenants 100%. So even though landlords, as the studies show, especially small landlords appreciate the SCEP program because it helps them, it tells them what maintenance they have to do, it's the tenants who are paying for it. Therefore, we recommend you combine the fees, you split them in half, and that would be fair and equitable. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And if you could identify yourself, since you provided, we need to know who our unofficial translator was this morning.
Yes, my name is Telmi Perez, and I am a member of the Los Angeles Housing Preservation Alliance.
Wait a minute, you're next.
Oh.
And how do you pronounce your first name again? How do you pronounce it? Is it Thelmy?
It's Telmi.
All right, so we have you.
Okay.
We have Betsy Handler, Elizabeth, I think it's Barkley or Barkey. Andrew.
Elizabeth Blaney.
Laura Quadros, Claudia Gomez. Ms. Perez.
Good morning, committee members. My name is Telmi Perez, and as I just expressed to you, I'm a member of the Los Angeles Housing Preservation Alliance. I sit in front of you today as a tenant, and one of those rent burden tenants, one of the 58%, which is an understatement because I am severely rent burdened. I'm paying about 75% of my income to rent right now. I'm here in support of the call to action recommendations that you've just heard from Barbara Schultz and from Larry Gross, and I'm sure you'll hear a little bit more about that today. While I support these recommendations wholeheartedly, I also think they don't go far enough. I also want to encourage you to consider what our community members here from Boyle Heights are talking about, and that's looking at an expansion of rent control to cover buildings that were occupied before 1995. I think 1978 isn't far enough, especially looking at the Economic Roundtable report, right, that says that 58% of us are rent burdened. I also wanted to speak really quickly to the elimination of the utility pass-through. I think it's unfair and it burdens us more. And last, I heard a suggestion to pass through 100% of the capital improvement fees, and I also think that that's unfair. I've seen a lot of abuse of what landlords are able to collect now, and I've seen a lot of tenants who don't want to complain about their conditions because the landlords are going to use this capital improvement loophole to collect more money for them and to raise the rent.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Handler.
Thank you. Good morning. My name is Betsy Handler. I'm the Director of Legal Services at Inner City Law Center. I endorse the comments of Mr. Gross and Ms. Schultz, and I also thank the Economic Roundtable for its very good work. I think the most important takeaway from this report is that landlords are doing well, excuse me, and tenants are not. And it is, in addition to splitting the SCEP fee, which definitely is a benefit to landlords as well as to tenants, and eliminating the 2% pass-through for gas and electric, which is a windfall for landlords, it is really important to implement a rent registration program. Enormous numbers of people, some 33% of those making $25,000 and under, are subject to illegal rent increases. There's no way to track this without rent registration. Landlords do not give people receipts. You cannot reconstruct the rent history. It's critical that we have this tool, which is a very low-cost tool.
Thank you. Okay, now I'm going to try it again. I think it's Elizabeth Blaney.
She's translating.
You.
She's translating in the other room.
Okay, so we will go to Laura now.
Buenos días, mi nombre es Laura Cuadros, yo vengo de la Unión de Vecinos de Boyle Heights.
Good morning, my name is Laura Cuadros, and I am from Boyle Heights.
Bueno, lo primero que quería decir es que no debería faltar equipo de traducción en esta audiencia, en donde la mayoría de inquilinos que están aquí hablan español, o muchos de ellos.
First of all, I wanted to tell you that it's very important that we always have translation equipment in these public hearings.
Yo estoy aquí porque en el área donde nosotros trabajamos ha habido una pérdida dramática de vivienda en los últimos años debido a los diferentes desarrollos. Ya lo mencionaron las personas de esta comunidad, como la construcción del metro, la construcción de la estación de policía, toda la destrucción de vivienda que hubo en los proyectos de Pico Aliso y Aliso Village, y no ha habido un reemplazo de vivienda en los últimos años. Las familias hispanas de por sí son numerosas.
So, I'm here because I wanted to also express to you the importance of acknowledging the fact that We've lost so many housing units in Boyle Heights due to the new construction of the police station and the metro station, and these are units that are not being replaced in our community.
Creemos que la expansión del control de renta hasta el año 1995, de viviendas que han sido construidas hasta el año 95, ayudaría de alguna manera a cubrir ese déficit de vivienda que tenemos en nuestra comunidad.
We believe that the idea of expanding rent control to protect buildings that were occupied before 1995 would be a huge improvement and a huge help in restabilizing our community.
Otra recomendación que quisiera apoyar es que no se cargue a los inquilinos con los porcentajes extras por pago de biles o de utilidades como son el de gas y de la electricidad cuando el dueño los paga, porque ya está demostrado que el dueño gana con eso y no es justo para los inquilinos.
I also want to support the recommendation that we eliminate the utility pass-throughs. These add additional burden to our families, and we feel that they are unfair.
Y finalmente apoyar la recomendación de que se congelen las rentas durante el tiempo de crisis, ya que para la gente de bajos recursos es sumamente difícil, si no imposible, poder mantener el pago de la renta y están quedando en la calle mucha gente.
And I also want to express to you that I support the recommendation that we freeze the rent increases, especially during this economic crisis. It's very difficult for families in our neighborhood to continue paying these additional rent increases and still pay the rent every month. It's a burden to us.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you, Laura. Now, and we know we've got to keep an eye on you because you can just, once you get started, you just seem motivated to continue. So, with that said, I think, Elizabeth, welcome, and thank you for your work in the overflow room. Yes.
My name is Elizabeth Blaney. I'm with Unión de Vecinos. I'm also a resident of Boyle Heights. And I did want to comment on the translation. I understand you mentioned that you were sensitive to the issue, but the translation equipment got here very late. Most people did not even get to hear except for maybe the last 4 minutes of the presentation. So that really does need to be addressed. And
well, like I said, the next time we will deal with that. I'm on the record of saying that. And if you look at me, you see I'm a human being. I'm not perfect. So, hey, today I screwed up by not having it here earlier. I take total responsibility for that.
Okay.
Now, and I'll
Thank
give you extra time.
Thank you. So I also want to...
You know what, I'd like to ask, particularly the organizers, make a phone call. Let us know that you need that, and I'm sure we'd be happy to accommodate. We have limited resources. So.
And as an extra assurance, we should get it done anyway.
Yeah.
But if you know you're coming with 10 to, just help us out, help your people out, and just give us an extra warning. Come on, guys, make sure you have it there. We appreciate the reminder.
Okay.
Go ahead.
I also wanted to acknowledge that there are 30 tenants who are in the overflow room who would also like to speak, and I know there was a cutoff for cards, but I wanted you to be aware of the number of tenants that took time off today to come here. The main point I would like to make would be regarding the...
I hate to interrupt you again, but what's the number that we have here of tenants?
I know that I counted 30 in the overflow room, and since I wasn't allowed in this room...
If there's any
tenants, si todos los inquilinos pueden pararse, por favor. Todos los inquilinos o personas que están aquí para apoyar. Pueden pararse, por favor. If all tenants could please stand up who are here to support the recommendations, que están aquí para apoyar las recomendaciones, todos los inquilinos.
Since we're not going to be able to hear all of them, Mr. Chair, just that. Yeah, thank you. Sorry.
We'll follow you home, Larry.
Para los que están en el otro cuarto, todas las personas que son inquilinos están aquí parando. Y ahorita voy a dar mi testimonio y después traduzco. So the main point that I wanted to make is we support all of the recommendations that have been made forth with the advocacy groups, but we wanted to take it a step further and really explain how the expansion of rent control is definitely a necessity in these cases. As you've heard over and over and over again about the rent burden, in Boyle Heights, we've lost 2,000 units of affordable housing due to construction and demolition that have not been replaced. There is no one-for-one replacement, and we've completely lost those units. And that's a net loss of 2,000 units. And because there's no replacement policy that addresses that, and because there's not enough land in Los Angeles. Building more affordable housing is not going to solve alone the affordable housing crisis. Expanding rent control will help support that. And it is possible, I understand there are legal challenges, but the City Council does have the power to help support and change state legislation to include units all built before 1995 to make this happen. And so we ask that you seriously make this recommendation. I understand the Economic Roundtable is not making that recommendation. I understand that the Housing Department is not making that recommendation. But the more than 2 million tenants in Los Angeles are making that recommendation. I think you need to really take that seriously, and I ask you to do that. And of course, we also support eliminating the pass-through, the 1% for gas and the 1% for loose. Thank you. There is nobody translating. Is it okay if I?
Yes, go right ahead.
So que estaba diciendo que es el punto que quiero hacer es que pedimos la expansión de control de renta para incluir todas las unidades que fueron construidas antes del 95. ¿Es posible para hacer eso? Es muy importante que hacemos eso, especialmente en mi comunidad hemos perdido 2,000 unidades de vivienda económica y esto no fue reemplazado, no hay política para reemplazarlos. Y solamente construcción de más vivienda no está suficiente para resolver el problema. Pero para expandir e incluir más unidades abajo de control de renta, esto puede dar más vivienda económica para los inquilinos. Y también el concejal tiene el poder para empezar un proceso de cambiar la ley estatual para esto puede pasar. Gracias.
Thank you. Claudia Gomez is the last speaker on this item.
Hola, mi nombre es Claudia Gómez.
Good morning, my name is Claudia Gomez.
Oh, good.
Yo soy de la Unión de Vecinos y también estoy aquí para apoyar que se expanda el control de rentas.
I'm from Unión de Vecinos, and I'm also here to support the expansion of rent control.
También había venido para apoyar que se congelen las rentas porque mucha de la gente en nuestra comunidad gana el mínimo.
And I'm also here to ask for you to consider a rent freeze because most of the neighbors in my community earn minimum wage.
Y muchos de ellos ahorita están pagando entre $900 y $1,200 de renta.
And most people in my neighborhood are paying between $900 and $1,200 for rent.
Entonces, el 1% de gas, el 1% de electricidad, estoy a favor de esto porque esto va a beneficiar a muchas familias de Boyle Heights y de Los Ángeles.
And I also believe in eliminating the 1% gas and the 1% water or electricity pass-through because this would alleviate many of the community members in my community.
También otra de las cosas que yo miré de la investigación fue que las encuestas se hicieron por teléfono. Quisiera que un poquito se fuera más a fondo de eso, que de puerta a puerta la gente supiera sus derechos como inquilinos y también los dueños, cuáles son sus derechos y responsabilidades.
And so I also wanted to really quickly talk about this survey that was done over the telephone by the Economic Roundtable, I believe, but I'm not sure. I just wanted to say that we need to take it a step further than that. It would be really helpful if the city would consider going door to door and telling people about what their rights are as tenants.
Muchísimas gracias.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, thank you. Okay, now, to move forward, like I mentioned earlier, we're going to continue this item. We will get a report back from the department. Within the next couple of weeks, we're going to try to arrange some panel discussions with tenant rights organizations and individuals from the apartment association just to hear both sides' concerns and to see how we can move forward on this issue with a fair and balanced approach. So again, I want to thank everybody for coming this morning and apologize for not having the translation equipment sooner, and in the future we hope to do that, but it would be of help if the organizers could take it upon themselves just to notify us that people are coming. So with that said, the next item is item 1.
Yes, sir. Item 1 is a report from the Community Development Department and the City Administrative Officer and the Housing Community Economic Development Committee relative to recommendations for selection of family source program providers based on the 2009 Family Source Program request for proposals and actions needed to implement new program operations.
Okay, now I have about 6 or 7 cards on this item. I'm going to ask that those of you that are here to speak quickly. I think you're going to want to have us deal with this item. We need to be down in chambers in about 5 minutes, so we should rock and roll on this one. I think it's a Miss McDonald. I think it's Dorothy, Dr. John, Julene, Reba or Rebe Long, Gloria Lockhart, B. Strozier, if you guys could please come forward. I'm sorry.
No, that card was lost.
Miss McDonald.
Yes. Good morning.
Good morning.
I am a board member of the Coalition of Mental Health Professionals. And the coalition is a community family service center. And we serve an area that is in dire need of our service. We have been in the area for 17 years, and we have been a very positive influence in the area. And I'm hoping that we will be able to continue it. Go ahead. I'm trying to keep it short, yeah.
And that's appreciated.
Thank you.
Doc?
Appreciate your wisdom.
Doc?
You want me to be next? My name is Reba Long.
Oh, Reba, I'm sorry. Where's the doc? There's a good doctor, I think.
Yeah.
There you are.
Okay.
I just made you a doctor.
I don't want it. My sister fights me already.
Oh, I didn't realize I was next, sorry.
You are.
Okay. Good morning, council members. My name is Johan Yulin. I'm a principal of RSM. We're a firm that bid on the evaluation component of the Family Source Center RFP. First, a big thanks to Mr. Cardenas for ensuring that the CDD complied with the CPRA. There can now finally be some scrutiny into the process used by the CDD in scoring the proposals for evaluation services. I must say that we were shocked by the lack of rigor that the CDD used in scoring our proposal. Because of time constraints, I'll focus on one particularly egregious issue. We'd used statistical sampling techniques to determine the number of people we would survey, and we found that you need to survey at least 56 people per service in each site to get meaningful results. The recommended bidders, however, would involve sampling only 4, which results in a margin of error of plus or minus 24%. Frankly, we find it shocking that the city would allow such lack of rigor. Why bother doing the survey at all? With such a high error rate, the results are essentially meaningless. So yes, it's no wonder that the recommended bid came in at $90,000 less than the amount the CDD budgeted, but the work won't result in valid conclusions. The sample sizes are simply too small. Thank you again for allowing us to bring this to your attention, and I'd be happy to take any questions that you might have. There's also a handout that I've distributed.
Thank you. Ms. Long, now you're up.
Yes, and I'm not a doctor. My sister is the one that you normally look at me and say her name, so I say hello to everyone. Yes, I am one of the persons that work for the Coalition Mental Health Professionals. We went into the bid for the contract. We successfully made the contract, but later on, we found out we were turned down, saying that we were not qualified for the position. I'm wondering why in the middle of the stream that we changed the rules. I understand what the gentleman just said here, but when the game plays with the basketball scores, we pay with the scores that are there. We do not change in the middle of the game. Now, the thing is that if you want to change it next time, then that's when you should do it, next time, not at this time. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Lockhart.
Yes, good morning. I'm Gloria Lockhart, President and CEO of Toberman Neighborhood Center. We are an agency that provides social services to low-income individuals and families, helping them to move from poverty to self-sufficiency in the harbor area. I'm very grateful for this opportunity. Thank you, Chair, Councilmember Wesson, and committee. We would like to continue serving families, but now we will be serving them through the Family Source Center. I would like to compliment CDD for this new paradigm shift. This is the first time the city has used a social work model
as prescribed by the National Association of Social Workers, where services will be provided using a logic model by professionals other than social workers within the context of the client's environment. Clients will now be able to come to Toberman for multiple services. The Family Source Center is very timely for us. We are just a few blocks away from the LA Port. We are forming a partnership with the Port so that we can prepare the community to embrace the 7,000 jobs that will be available to the community.
Thank you.
So thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Stotzer.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Very simple. My name is Bea Stotzer, and I'm on the board of New Economics for Women, who has been providing over 20 years of opportunities in helping families build their assets. We've been at the forefront of many of these trends way before they became official in the city of Los Angeles. I'm just here to urge you to move forward with CDD's recommendation for all of the agencies that were recommended and commend the department for doing such a stellar job.
Thank you. Norma Jean Vescovo. This is the last speaker on this item.
Thank you very much for taking the time to hear us. I am the Executive Director of the Independent Living Center of Southern California. We have provided services to people with disabilities since 1976 in the Valley, and we continue. We've worked with the city all of these years. For the first time, we have joined a family source group with the new Economics for Women, and we are really looking forward to it. We hope that you will stick with that recommendation. This is the first time that it's been recognized that all of these facilities are to be accessible. There should be full ADA compliance, and that for the first time, we'll be able to mainstream people with disabilities through the process. So I thank you for your effort, and I hope that you will stick with what is recommended. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now, with that said, we do have representatives from CDD that are here, but Mr. Cardenas, I think, if you could come, I think Mr. Cardenas has a statement and some suggestions as to how we move forward. So with that said, Mr. Cardenas.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and I appreciate the opportunity for us to have this dialogue once again in the committee. I do see that the hour is late. We are expected in council, so I'll be extremely brief. Mr. Sines, in reviewing your process, you have conveyed to me that you are definitely willing to continue to improve the process that CDD has developed,
Oh, yes,
correct?
sir.
And you do agree that the process is not perfect?
Oh, yeah.
Okay. And
I'll
that-
follow Mr. Weston's lead this morning. We do our best, and we continue to
Exactly.
improve.
And I agree that you have a good process, but there are some elements that could be improved, and we discussed those, and I'm sure you'll work with whoever else, the community, and whatever entities feel that they have something to say to help improve that process. You've indicated that, so thank you very much. So with that, the last time this was in committee, I made a motion that is different than the motion that I'm going to make today, Mr. Chairman, and the motion that I make today that we approve the staff recommendations as put forth before this committee, and including the South Valley recommendation, and and that CDD move forward with the South Valley recommendation and work with the appropriate city resources, offices, and departments to incorporate entities within that contract that meet the specific needs of the community. Yes, sir.
Okay, so with that said, Ms. Barclay, Mr. City Attorney, without objection, we will adopt the CAO report with the amendments put forth by Mr. Cardenas. I want to say my dear friend for a long time, Dove Pinkney, is in the house today. Dove, I don't have a clue why you're here, but it's always a pleasure to see you. Ms. Barclay, is there any more business before this committee?
No, sir.
This committee is adjourned. Thank everyone for coming.
Thank you.